Welcome to our podcast, A Novel Talk, co-hosted by Carl Lee, and I'm Wendy Kendall. My mystery book, Cat Out of the Bag, that's cat with a K, is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It's about Catherine Watson, an international purse designer and amateur sleuth who's challenged by an intriguing mystery in her hometown of Bayside. I hope you'll enjoy it. And here is your co-host.
Thank you, Wendy. I am Carl Lee, and I write paranormal fantasy.
Our guest today is author Connie Hampton Connally. She's loved music and the written word all her life, and many of her adult years she's spent working in those fields as well. She's published magazine stories and newspaper articles, worked as an editor, and taught high school English and elementary music. Through teaching music, Connie became aware of the turbulent 20th century history of Hungary, where music spread in spite of war and totalitarianism. In her book, The Songs We Hide, Connie has composed a stirring tribute to the incredible strength of people in a brutal time in Hungarian history and the desperate need to create hope. Connie Hampton Connally, welcome to A Novel Talk.
Thanks, Wendy and Carl. It's great to be joining you. And I also want to say, Wendy, congratulations on your new novel. I'm reading it and I'm enjoying it, and I'm almost done. So last night I just found out who the killer is.
Oh,
but I won't tell.
Thanks so much, Connie. That's so nice of you. I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's great.
It is a great book, as is the Songs We Hide. And I'm not being paid to say that for either of those books. Connie, would you give our listeners a summary of your book, The Songs We Hide? Just a brief, high-level summary.
Sure. I think the easiest way to do that would probably be for me to just go ahead and read what's on the back of the book. So here we go. In 1951, a grim hush has settled over Hungary. After a lost war and a brutal transition to communism, the people live in constant threat of blacklisting, property confiscation, arrest, imprisonment, and worse. In this milieu of dread, the best land of Peter Benedict's peasant family is seized and his life upended. Moving to Budapest for a manual labor job, Peter meets Katalin Varga, an unwed mother whose baby's father has vanished, most likely at the hands of the secret police. Both Peter and Katalin keep their heads down and their mouths clamped shut because silence is the only safety they know. But the two have something in common besides fear. They are singers. When Katalin starts giving Peter voice lessons, they take an intrepid step out of hiding by making music together. Little by little, they tell each other what they cannot tell others. In their bond of trust, they find relief and unexpected happiness. Yet the hurts and threats in their lives remain, waiting. As harsh reality assaults them again, is hope even possible? Facing their hardest trials yet, Peter and Katalin learn to carve dignity and beauty out of pain.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, just hearing that summary of it, it just brings back all the emotion that is jam-packed.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about what is it about Hungary that first inspired this book?
Yeah. So I became interested in Hungary through my love of music and through teaching children about music. Hungary has a rich tradition of both classical music and folk music, and I actually have loved both of those musical styles since I was a teenager. And so the Hungary's folk musician or folk music tradition out of its peasant culture, and its classical tradition came from its close association with when they were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So anyway, music is a huge part of Hungary's culture. But what really fascinated me was that during the 20th century, when their country was basically collapsing, music continued to spread. The 20th century was absolutely awful for Hungary. 2 world wars, both of which they lost, a failed revolution, fascism, and communism, plus economic wreckage a couple different times. So the suffering was terrible, but music remained a part of who they are. And that just really struck me. And so I was just kind of caught up with that idea of what does it mean to do something beautiful and creative when everything around you is falling apart? And that's at the heart of the songs we hide.
Excellent. You spoke about how music inspired the songs we hide. Where else do you find inspiration for your writing?
That's a great question, Carl, and I had to think about that a little bit. But one of the things that really has always attracted me is when I either meet someone or hear about someone who, for whatever reason, handles things just a little more bravely or a little more courageously than what you would expect. And it doesn't have to be big in public. It can be a very private thing, but it really just kind of reaches my heart. And to give you an example, about 5 years ago, one of my friends was going through cancer treatment, and in the process of that, she lost all of her hair. So here was a normally attractive woman who was bald, and she decided not to cover up with a hat or a wig. And her comment about it was, well, I've lost my pride, but I've learned dignity. And, that just really struck me. And a lot of times I go back to that on a personal level. So that was a year when I was writing for the Tacoma paper. And so I wrote an article about her cancer treatment and the way that she looked at it. And it touched other people too. So examples like that really mean a lot to me. I also find inspiration in travel because I love to learn about other cultures. Also, I used to be a teacher, and so I often find myself noticing how other people learn or how they teach. So I guess it's not surprising that in my novel, Caroline teaches Peter singing. I took voice lessons, and so actually some of the things that she says to him, my teacher used to say to me. And the book I'm writing now also has a teacher in it.
Mm-hmm. Connie in real life.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'm really touched, especially by the what you said about the moments of courage that come up from people, individuals, and I don't really think about that often, but yeah, we should slow down and really notice those courageous moments in other people's lives. That's
Right.
really.
And sometimes take a moment to mention it to them, because they may not have realized that it makes an impression on others and is helpful to others, but it's true.
Yeah, I really like that. Speaking of courageous times, Winston Churchill said, "Those who fail to learn from history are condemned to repeat it." Is your historical novel more than a story for the contemporary reader?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that, Wendy. First off, I want to say that the songs we hide, in my view, is really, I didn't write it as a political novel. It really is a personal story about people finding strength during hardship. But with that said, I hope that the book will help Americans to understand what Eastern Europe has been through. One thing that happened after my book was published and people started reading it is that I often had readers saying to me, wow, I just didn't know that things were like that. I didn't know it was so bad. And um, and that concerns me that people don't know. Um, I think that America has done an excellent job of remembering Hitler's tyranny and and how bad things were during World War II. But we have not remembered how hard the post-war years were on Europe. Maybe because we didn't really know, we didn't live through it ourselves. But it was very harsh and very difficult. And Stalin was a real tyrant too. And, you know, half the European continent suffered tremendously after the war. And so I just would like that to be more a part of America's awareness.
Yeah, I
So,
have to tell you, Connie, and I'm a proud product of the public education system. And
yeah,
I'll tell you, this was eye-opening to me. I had no idea. For me, it was like the war ended, turn the light switch on, and everything was fine after that. And this was just eye-opening to me. I had no idea how long the effects of a difficult
yeah.
time can be.
Right. And it was actually eye-opening for me to do the research too. And if I may, I would like to just tell you a couple of things that surfaced when I was doing my research, because one of the things I did was to interview some Hungarians who had lived through that time period. And these were not the people that had suffered the most. I mean, the people that suffered the most ended up in Siberia or ended up dead. But on a just on a daily personal level, one of the women that I talked to, her family was forced to leave their home and to go live in a town miles and miles away. They had no say in it. Another man that I talked to, his dad ended up in jail for 6 months over a we would never consider an offense at all. And another woman that I talked to, her father was being watched by the government, and so her father said to her mom, "Look, honey, we need to get divorced because you and the kids will be safer if you're not connected to me."
Oh.
And you know what a horrible thing to have your marriage end because of that kind of pressure. And so that was what unfortunately was going on pretty commonly at that time.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. That was a very bleak period of European history. But somehow you managed to show hope and compassion against this dire backdrop. How did you do that? How did you achieve so much joy against this very dark backdrop?
Oh, what a great question. First of all, I do have to say it's very challenging the writing it, because on the one hand, I needed to show how difficult things were, and yet I didn't want to crush the reader with it, and I wanted to make it ultimately a hopeful story. And so what
Success.
thank you. Um, but you asked about how I brought compassion into the story, and I think what it meant for me was I thought a lot about the risks that people had to take just to have normal friendships and acts of kindness, because you truly did not know who you could trust. But I decided to use acts of kindness as a way to bring hope into the story. One of the main examples, of course, is when Cataline says yes about giving Peter voice lessons. She's not at all sure she should. She doesn't really know him very well,
Mm-hmm.
but she sees that he's had a hard life and he wants something better, and she really relates to that. So then he begins to, in turn, help her. And so with the trust growing between them, that brought them hope, because there was a sense of, oh, good, somebody has my back and I'm not alone. And I think that that was one of the main ways that people found hope, was just in those relationships that they had, where you had a few people that you knew, okay, this is someone I can trust, and I can be with this person and I can relax a little. So that was the main way that I wanted to bring hope in the story. The other thing was through their making music, and that really does lift the spirit. And so that was part of it too.
Beautiful. Well, the hardest of times is suffered by people of different ages in their life in different ways. You show us these differences in a way that really touches the heart. Can you speak about the families in your book? Did you draw it all from your own wonderful big family?
um, yes, I think I did, not consciously, but looking back on it, yeah. Um, one of the similarities is that Peter is part of an all-male family, and his mother has died. And I raised 3 boys and no girls, and so I was very used to male interactions all the time, and so it felt very, very natural. Peter's male family. But another way in which my family was an influence in the writing of my book was that 2 of my sons have lived abroad. My son Brendan still lives abroad. He lives working in the mountains with the Quechua people. And my son Patrick is for the State Department. And although he lives in D.C. now, for a while he lived in Cameroon in Africa, and for a while in the Philippines, and for a while in Switzerland. And my husband and I visited them everywhere that they live. And so we really began to get a firsthand feel for how other places are not like the. And that, just that inner knowledge and kind of coming to accept that, was absolutely crucial, actually, for writing historical fiction, because you have to be able to step out of your own culture and into the culture you're writing about. So that was a huge influence from my kids, actually.
Nice. Can you tell us some more? Oh, sorry. Can you tell us some more about creating the personality of your character, Cataline, who's a single mother?
Yeah. I came to view her as a soft-hearted person who is hurt and scared. And as I worked with her, it really came through that she was basically a person with a lot of sympathy for others and a bit of a rescuer, also a bit of a romantic, which is what had something to do with how she ended up as an unwed mother. But over the course of the novel, she really has to learn to face the hard realities of her future. And in this way, Peter is good for her because he's very realistic. And yet he's very supportive too. And he helps her find her own strength. And I kind of came to see that in some ways, Cataline's story is kind of a belated coming of age story. Because even though she's 20 and she has a baby, she still has to come to the point of really saying goodbye to girlhood and truly becoming a woman and taking strong steps for her own life. But by the end of the book, she's done that.
Yeah, you said Peter was reliable. He's a pretty no nonsense kind of guy. He's flexible, but he's very, very focused on what has to be done. The things that must get accomplished. These are the things that you focus on. You contrast Peter's flexibility to his father's dogged determination. How did you work those two angles into a working family?
And I honestly, I can't even really remember exactly how the father's personality emerged in my mind, except that Janci Benedict, the dad, was really, really angry about losing his land, which happens in the first scene of the book. But I do want to say that Janci is pretty representative of the Hungarian farmers at that time who ended up being forced into collectivized farming. It was extremely frustrating for them because, as in the case of Janci and a lot of others, he had worked very hard just to own a little bit of land, and his father also had worked hard to get the land. And so land ownership was a family dream, but it was also a real necessity because at that time in the village life, land ownership was really the only way to have any standing in the community. And it was also the only way that you could really ensure your future at all. And so for them, the land was an absolute necessity. So to have it taken away was infuriating for Janci. And since he's a proud man, it totally went against his sense of justice, went against his sense of who he was as a person. The other thing weighing on Janci was that he was a widower. He had lost his wife. And so he had no, he didn't have the kind of comfort that might have come to him if she were still living. So it was very hard for him to see anything positively.
Families are a great source of joy and love. But could you speak about some of the other characters? We've talked enough about the joy and love people. Some of the other characters in the book, like Comrade Erica or Tomas Marchon.
Okay, there again, those two, they kind of grew out of my research as I found out more about who were some of the types of people that ended up kind of in positions of at least a little bit of control over others. So Tomasz Martin is the president of the collective farm in Peter's farm village. He is a communist and he's strongly involved in local politics, and he works closely with the police. So he has that power at his disposal. He was not a successful farmer prior to communism entering the country. He he was a sharecropper. But in this position with the collective farm, he finally has some influence and some actual power. And so that is creating real headaches for people like Peter's father. One thing I'll say about this is that people who have that kind of position, if they wanted to, they could really make things difficult for people that they had old resentments toward, or people that got in their way in some way. And so it was a way that if people wanted to be vindictive, they could. They could also put their own friends and family into good positions. So it was a system that was very manipulable. And then you asked about Comrade Erica. Yeah, she is the apartment manager in the apartment building where Cuddling lives, and it's the building that Peter moves into. And so at that time, it was common for loyal members of the Communist Party to be given positions as apartment managers because they could keep an eye on the people in the building. And if necessary, report to the secret police. And there again, Comrade Erica was also a woman who used that position to her advantage. I will say, though, trying to kind of look at things from their viewpoint a little bit, is that this was a time when everybody was afraid. And so getting into a position like this was something that people would want to do, because then they could kind of be the person on the top instead of the person getting stepped on. And so it was partly a matter of self-protection, sometimes a way to protect their families, and occasionally even a person who was sympathetic to the people around them would sometimes get into a position like that and then end up protecting the other people. And that was risky to do because you didn't want the people above you catching on that that's what you were doing, but it did sometimes happen.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't think of her in that light, but yeah, interesting.
Connie, I just enjoyed this book so much. Can we look forward to another book from you in the future soon?
I am writing one. It's a difficult book, and it's taken a long time to write it, but it is moving forward, and I'm excited for when it actually is finished and released. The novel that I'm writing now is the main character in it is actually Catalin's older brother Antal, who is a violinist, and in the story that I'm writing now, which is the working title is Fire Music. And so part of the story is kind of like a prequel to The Songs We Hide. It takes place 6 years earlier at the end of the war during the siege of Budapest, which was horrible and a very traumatic time in the life of Antal Varga, the violinist. So that's part of the story that took place when Antal was 17. The other thread of the story takes place 2 generations later, when he's 78. And younger members of the family have found some music that he wrote when he was 17 and the city was under siege. And they're asking him, what happened? And it's very hard for him to tell them. But this is kind of I like to say it's a redemptive story, because it serves as kind of healing for all of them in different ways. So that's where it is. I'm hoping that it will come together before too long.
That
But I've
sounds
really
like
enjoyed working on it.
it sounds like an amazing read coming up. I'm excited.
Coming soon-ish,
Soon,
but
coming ASAP. Yeah,
but
right.
hopefully coming sooner than that. I was wondering, Connie, could I convince you to do a reading from the songs we hide for our listeners, but really for me.
Yeah, love to.
Wendy, you can listen to.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to read the first scene of the book. And as I mentioned to you, what happens in the first scene of the book is um, they lose their land. So here we go. 6 years after the war was lost, the spring harrowing still turned up bullets and mortar shell pieces in the fields every March. The farmers of Hevesh County had grown used to this happening. The war's detritus was easier to live with than the shortages that should have ended by now, easier to deal with than the produce quotas for the good of the people. Peter Benedict, 22 years old, kicked away a gray shell fragment as he led two plow horses up the long, narrow field of newly sprouted wheat. His father paced behind, anchoring and guiding the weed harrow. Not loudly enough for his father to hear, Peter sang to the mare beside him. She was temperamental since the war, and today she was teamed with a borrowed gelding. The mare's left ear turned toward him. Then it pricked forward toward the road. Peter eyed the source of the noise at the field's far end. With a muddy rumble, a black motor car pulled into view. A state car. There was no other kind here. Peter stopped singing. He looked over his shoulder at his father. Appa. With a small pitch of his head, Peter indicated the road. They watched the car pull aside and brake. The doors opened and three figures climbed out. Peter halted the horses. His right hand gripped the reins too tightly, and he made himself ease up for the sake of the mare. Three of them this time, Appa muttered. The men crossed the field, a grim triangle, their forms blurring in the mist, then sharpening as they drew closer. Peter envied them their long, warm coats. He recognized all in back, the squat deputy who had once been police chief here, and then the hulking younger man who had taken his job. In front walked Tamas Martin, the local party secretary who ran the communal farm. Peter remembered when the man used to sharecrop barley. The three stopped a few meters away. Martin touched one hand to his fur cap and gave a nod in greeting. Freedom! Peter glanced at his father. Appa only brushed a finger over his graying mustache. His gaze moved between the three men. The police chief set his hands on his service belt and drew back his shoulders. Peter tried to catch Appa's eye. Speak! Appa did not speak. Peter lifted the brim of his cap and summoned the saliva to his dry mouth. Good day, comrades, he said. Tamas Martin threw Peter a look, but turned back to Appa. Yanchi Benedict! Martin swept a gloved hand in a downward arc, left to right. This is not your land, he said. Peter's chest pulsed hot. Appa's hand dropped from the harrow. What? He asked. Martin gestured toward the west. The fields there belong to the collective farm, he said. I know, Appa said. Martin pointed toward the stream to the east and the field that lay this side of it. And also there, he said. No, Appa answered, that's Jakob Kozma's land. Kozma joined the collective yesterday, Martin said. He is supporting the economic plan. Papa stared at Martin. So you see, Martin said, there is collective property on either side. The economic plan calls for communal farms to have contiguous land. The collective will work this land now. He jerked his thumb toward the lower field that had belonged to Jakob Kozma. There's yours. Peter had walked that land. A good third of it was nothing better than pig mud. His hand closed taut on the reins. The mare tossed her head. The gelding sidestepped. The harness jerked. Peter clutched the mare's halter. Ho! He ordered the horses, hearing the choke in his own voice. Appa grasped the harrow again. My son and I already planted this field, he said. We have work to do here. Peter, forward. Go. But the big police officer in back pulled the billy club out of his service belt and thumped it in the palm of his hand. Work this land if you want to, citizen, but the harvest belongs to the collective. The three turned and walked away, with only the short deputy turning once to look back. Peter did not move the horses forward. He stood with his father among the green shoots of this lost land. He knew its every ridge and pit, knew the desperate hopes that he and his father and his grandfather had sown here year after year. Beside him, his father gazed over the field in silence. Peter wanted to speak, but the words would not come. When the car drove off and the drone of its engine faded, there remained only the sounds of a distant crow, and now and then the stamping of the horses. So
Oh, wow. Wow. Thank you. I love that. Thank you for the reading.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, wow, what a hook, too. What a frame up for this book.
Thanks,
It's
Wendy.
an amazing read. And thank you just for joining us for a novel talk. Listeners,
Thank you so much for inviting me.
well, listeners will definitely want to check out your website, ConnieHamptonConnally.com. And those who have not yet read it will definitely want to buy your touching historical novel, The Songs We Hide. And a thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and keep reading because a novel read leads to a novel talk.